Good morning, all. Am I on? How about now? Good morning. Jessica is actually set up in the fellowship hall. If you haven't gotten your picture taken, we really want to push that for a pictorial directory. So head back in. You can even have permission to leave early if you'll go quickly. For the past several weeks, we've been digging deeper and deeper and deeper into the book of Daniel. And we've been focusing on our small group campaign, Thriving in Babylon. Today, I up chapters 5 and 6 of the book of Daniel, and I hope that you're beginning to get a feel for how this book of Daniel, 2,600-year-old writing, still has relevance for us today. Relevance, there you go, relevance for us today. Daniel lived his entire life during one of the most turbulent periods of military history maybe the world has ever seen. Between Assyria in the northeast and Babylon, between Egypt and finally Media and Persia, the Middle East and North Africa and really Eastern Europe, they had never before experienced the jostling and the conquest like they witnessed in the 6th century BC when Daniel lived. The land was dominated by power struggles, basically what it was. Power struggles and a desire for control of wealth, control of people, control of power. And throughout the eyes of Scripture during this period, we get to share what the losers feel. Remember the Jews, or the remnant of this nation of Israel. The Jews are our main characters in Scripture, God's chosen people, if you will. They no longer played a big role, really, in anyone's battles. They were merely the building blocks that others utilized for their own empires. And the Jews were not, they were nobodies in a world of big somebodies. When you look at Assyria, and you look at Babylon, and you look at Persia, you look at Greece here in a couple hundred years, the Jews for this period of time were just insignificant, almost nobodies. Yet through it all, the Jews still held significance because the God of all creation was on their side. Yes, his desire was to punish them for sin, but he still loved them, and he still planned to bring his plan of redemption through them. In a pure sense, Daniel, our main character for this small group campaign, Daniel it's really just but a conduit to show the power of God regardless of the obedience or disobedience of God's people. The prestige and position of a favored people will not always divulge the importance of the God they serve, but if they serve the one true God, his power should never be questioned. And maybe that's the biggest story of the book of Daniel. And today we're going to start, instead of starting with chapter 5, we're going to start with chapter 6. And some parts of the Bible are so good that I think they require you to remember them, maybe even above some of the others. Daniel 6 is one of those stories. And very quickly, today's going to be a little bit different. I pulled the pulpit out so you know what's coming. I need 7 volunteers. Could I get 7 volunteers? Come on up. I need 7 people, 7 volunteers to come up and to play some roles. Come on. Okay. Now, here's the roles that we need. In Daniel chapter 6, we have basically the roles of a king, we have Daniel, we have satraps, and we have lions. And if you guys stand at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right. I think, Tom, you're going to be king. You're going to be the Burger King. Okay, who are the 2 smallest? The 2 smallest, all right. You guys get to be lions. And I didn't have a lion robe, so you guys this is the only fur coat I could find. So so you guys get out here and you have to be out there on the ground. Chop, chop. Boy, you are good-looking lions. Wow. Okay, the three who wants to be Daniel? Who's the best reader? Hey, you're Daniel. You get the cowboy hat. And you guys are the satraps. Now, what I have, that's for me. Where's Daniel? You're Darius. Now, just remember, if we walk through this, and all three of you guys get one of these, but you guys have a mic. Where'd that mic go? You guys have to act this out like we're at church camp, okay? So, the first one, who's going to have the first line? It's the satraps. So, somebody has to be in the middle and hold it. And when we get to the line, you guys have to get down lines. You're not a part of this yet. All right, if you cannot see, make sure you can. Move around. All right, here we go. We're going to walk through the book of Daniel so that you will remember this maybe a little bit better than other chapters. It pleased Darius. Darius, you got to get out. You got to wave when your name is, you can't just stand there. You're the king. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps. There you go. To rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. Okay. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now, Daniel, you got to take a step forward. This is acting. So Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said,
"We'll never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God."
So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king, so you got to go as a group to the king, and said,
May King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, and satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict, enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being the next 30 days, except you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed.
The Medes, not the Medes, the Medes and the Persians. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem 3 times a day. He got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God with his hat off, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree.
Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den?
The king answered,
The decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed.
Then they said to the king,
Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, paid no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day.
When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and make every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said,
Remember, your majesty, the accordance to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed.
So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel,
May your God whom you serve continually rescue you.
a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. You should kind of go throw Daniel in. There you go. Now you lions, you don't have a speaking part, but you can kind of You guys can kind of traipse around him and look for him. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice.
Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions?
Daniel answered,
May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty.
The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. So go get him. No wound was found on him because he had trusted in God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel, you're going to have to do this, Daniel and the king, were brought in and thrown into the lion's den. So throw these guys in. Now you guys can devour them. Along with their wives and children. Interesting. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth.
May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed, his wonders in heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lion.
So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. All right, thank you all. Let's give them a hand. All right, I need all these back. And thank you. We finally found a use for those fur coats. Well, the story of Daniel. It's fun. Thanks for participating and kind of hopefully bringing the text to life a little bit anyway. We now know the story, but the focus of our small group was this. The focus of today was supposed to be living set apart. How do we live set apart for Christ in a culture that is distinctly pulling away from our Christian heritage? I want to talk about three things, kind of the old deductive sermon. And I think that we can find in here three things. Conduct your life worthy of Christ, push the envelope, be a Christian without timidity, and humble yourself, with the idea of accolades are best when they come from others and not yourself. And so we start with conducting your life worthy of Christ. Allow me to be so blunt as to say, folks, if your behavior does not mimic the claims of your mouth, you will be considered a fool, and rightly so. What word do we place on that? Hypocrite. Hypocrisy. That's exactly what it is. People should see Christ in you before they have to ask if you're a Christian. You know, Daniel could have hidden his prayer life, prayed in front of a window, facing Jerusalem. He knew that, boy, these guys are out to get him. He knew that, but he didn't turn. He didn't change. Daniel could have avoided being seen, and I think he could do that without breaking any Old Testament laws. But the point was that he wanted to live his life as God would have him live it, with or without the interference of the world. That's really the heart of the story. Life is too short to always have to watch your back. At the point you become convinced that living a godly life is right, then do it without regret or concern. Might you be mistreated? Yep. It's coming. Might there be persecution? Yep. Granted. I look at how our country has changed in my lifetime, and I look at my son at 12 years old. I do believe that he is going to see major, major changes. I think that he's going to see a lot more persecution than we have seen in our lifetime. I think that life is going to get absurd. I think it's going to get far worse before it ever changes. Yes, you will be mistreated. Yes, you will come under fire. Yes, your life will not be void of conflict, but when you stand for God under fire, it rejuvenates your faith like nothing else. If you're going to heaven and the world is going to hell, your paths should look distinctly different. Remember that. Folks, realize that if we try to fit into culture, we just become a part of culture. Second thing was push the envelope. Be a Christian without timidity. I applaud those who make a stand for certain things. I love it when I find out in just everyday life, without being told at church, I love it when I see people really making a stand for something or caring or sharing. I'll tell you what, it means more to me when I find out through the grapevine of good things rather than being told by somebody that they did them. Know what I'm talking about? It's always more fun. If you were walking through our fair city of Alexandria, and let's say you saw an exposed electrical wire poking in the ground, sizzling everything that was around it, and you could even hear the bugs or something. Let's say it was summer, and here it was hot enough that it was burning all the grass around it. I think that most of us would try to point out to someone who might be able to do something about it. If you were just walking down the street or walking in a park, one of our local parks, and you saw this electrical wire just exposed, burning all that's around it, I think most of us would probably do something. Now, we wouldn't know what to do. You might not know how to fix it. You'd look around and you might not know who exactly to tell, but you'd tell somebody. Why? Well, you know that a 3-year-old might walk by it and hear that zzz, 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 and go up and touch it and be electrocuted. We know that. We wouldn't need to know all the details of what happened or if something was wrongfully constructed, but we would want to know that it was safe. Now, one of the problems is the human life has a duration of about 80 years, give or take. The immediacy of eternity is not usually viewed in terms of emergency. You know, that's the problem. We see conduct not becoming Christ. The problem is there's so much of us that we just don't see the immediacy. Because the idea is, their lifespan is going to be another 70, 80 years, or maybe it's only 50 years, but I don't want to go out of my way. I don't want to have an altercation where I might be belittled. I might be hurt. You see, we would go out of our way to stop a small child or anybody being electrocuted. But the reality is, because of our duration of life, we don't get that excited about the immediacy of salvation. How valuable are you? You have the resolution, you have the answer, you have the antidote of all of the world problems. And without that solution, without that antidote, the people around you are as good as dead. The problem is it might not come for another 20 years, another 40 years. You know, as Daniel knelt down to pray in that open window, prayed toward Jerusalem, I don't know that he knew that he was going to be an instrument of God because of that very behavior. But I also don't know that he didn't know. I don't know that he knew that he was going to be an instrument of God, but I don't know that he didn't know he was going to be an instrument of God. He simply lived his life with that possibility. You see, many times we look back, and I think a lot of people, and I have heard it myself, where they say, oh, back in the day, all the good Jewish boys, they all knew the Torah, and they knew this, and they knew, oh boy, they were really educated. You know what? I don't believe that. I have seen human culture. Remember, here's Daniel. I think Daniel was very, very, very unique. I think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they weren't normal. I was told all along, oh, back in Jesus' day, all the boys, they were well behaved and they knew this. I don't believe that. I believe that there were some, just like there are today. I don't think it was normal. To me, if they would have known it way back in the Old Testament days, they probably would have behaved a little bit better than they did. See, the reality of it is, Daniel was unique. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, unique. I don't know where Daniel came up with his faith, because by golly, he had a faith that was a lot stronger than the government that he grew up in. And he was a palace boy. He was one of the aristocracy. So where'd it come from? Somehow God used him. Somehow Daniel had a desire to know. Somehow Daniel knew that he was going to be used. And finally, humble yourself. Maybe we go back to chapter 5. The great story of chapter 5, we can always go back and say, what if, and we can't always answer that. But isn't it something that, here's Sennacherib, not Sennacherib, oh boy, not Shalmaneser, I'm trying to think of all the names. Belshazzar, there you go, Belshazzar. And Daniel's name was Belteshazzar. Belshazzar, the king, he was the last of the Babylonian kings. Here he is having a feast. Now, many of the history books actually think that that feast has great significance to the story. The Medes and the Persians had been coming into Babylonian occupation, and for years, and they had been slowly but surely eating away the Babylonian Empire, and Babylon didn't even care. The reason was they had built this city, this ginormous city. The walls measured almost 60 feet around. And so they basically thought, no one can overtake us. Most of the city was double-walled. They had the gardens. They had everything beautiful. They had the Euphrates River coming through. It's indestructible. Nobody can challenge us. And so what they did is when the Medes and the Persians started to invade, they didn't even care. They retreated to their ginormous city and said, we're sick of defending all the empire. We are so wealthy. We have cattle. We have livestock. We'll never be taken. No one can ever bring down great Babylon. And so what happened was, as they got closer and closer and closer to the city, most people think that Belshazzar actually gave this feast almost to mock the Medes and the Persians. They had this great feast with heavy alcoholic consumption, with the idea of saying, you know what, we know that you're right outside the walls, but you still can't take us because we live in a city that is impenetrable. And many people think that he was so pompous. They were so content in their power. And that's when Belshazzar calls for the goblets from the temple, just as a final note of saying, oh, I am king, I am great, I am over everything, I am going to, and even you Jews, my grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, said that your God was great. Nope, I'm great. I'm even going to take his goblets from the temple. I'm going to use them for my own use. I'm going to drink booze out of it and rejoice. Now, we'll never know if that was the final stretch of God. I think it was just God's timing. But as he's getting drunk, and as he's reveling in his pompous and his power. Here comes that handwriting on the wall. You've been weighed and found wanting. Your kingdom's going to be turned over, and it's going to be turned over tonight. And that's when the Persians, the Medes and the Persians, had rerouted the Euphrates River, came in on a dry riverbed, and conquered the entire city. And history says they did it in less than 3 hours. Hardly any fighting. They just basically took over a drunken city. And then now Babylon is done. The Babylonian Empire ends with Belshazzar. And now we have Darius, who sits as king, but really it's Cyrus the Persian, who is overall in control. And that's when we get into Daniel chapter 6 that we just read. But the idea of the final thing is to humble oneself. I look at Daniel. Daniel is a giant in my eyes, mostly because of what he didn't do or didn't say. You know, Daniel, through God's power, had done some incredible things in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, the days of Belshazzar. He said, oh, here's what the writing means. Here's what your statue, Nebuchadnezzar, means. Here's the different visions that you have done. But in chapter 5, with the handwriting on the wall and the fall of Babylon to Persia, we find an entirely new set of rulers. And so they didn't know. Darius yet didn't know the power of Daniel. At the beginning of chapter 6, Daniel's already in prominence, and he already seems to have the affection and respect of Darius. Why didn't Daniel set himself up to be protected from the jealous satraps that wanted him done? Why didn't he? Did you ever think about that? Daniel, you're so smart. You're in such power. You're basically third in control. You have such power. Aren't you smart enough to see that the other people are conspiring against you? Why didn't you stick by Darius and make sure that he didn't write that decree? Well, folks, sometimes I think we have to realize God does not want to work through smooth lives. Think about that. When your life is smooth, without a glitch in it, when your life is so smooth and just kind of the American dream, I'm living large. What does that influence others? It doesn't. You see, in reality, our life is going to have more influence on others through our problems that were resolved through the power of God. That's where influence comes. See, Daniel is in prominence already in chapter 6, but it seems like maybe he even knows that it's coming. And he often says, you look at it and you almost have to think to yourself and say, you know what, I think Daniel had the same kind of attitude that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had. Back a few chapters, when Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, when they found out that they weren't going to bow down to that statue, they were given a chance to correct themselves. And their response was, nah, we're not going to do it because our God is going to save us. But even if he doesn't save us, we're still not going to bow down to you. Almost this, nah, we're not. I love it. And that's what Daniel is kind of saying here. You know what? I know that Daniel probably could have rerouted some thought. Daniel had to have known. They didn't hate him because of really who he was. They hated him because he was in their way. They wanted to gain prominence. And what better way to walk up the corporate ladder than to pull the person ahead of you down? That was their goal. They couldn't find anything wrong with Daniel. It's kind of hard to hate somebody that's so good. You know, hindsight would suggest that Daniel, maybe he should have taken Darius aside and kind of went up to him and said, there, buddy, FYI, some of the satraps are hankering for my disposal so they can obtain greater authority in your kingdom. So be careful, or they'll trap you and me. Daniel had to know that wisdom, but never used it. But wouldn't have that been the wise thing to do? No, not if you want to press your God. You see, in all of this, there's a sense of humility, yes, being humble, allowing somebody else to say your accolades, not throwing it in somebody's face, not sharing, oh, here's what I do, here's what I do, here's what I do, not having 6 titles after your name. It's one of the things when it came to academics, I didn't always appreciate all the different masters and PhDs after one's name. I like it when people see what you're really made of. Folks, humility pays dividends. But sometimes those dividends are long-term payments. They don't come back quickly all the time. Not every situation has to center around you, and it doesn't have to center around me. There's a fine line between being great and being prideful. A fine, fine line. Know the difference. Humility. It's the difference between hearing your opinion and hearing the good news of Jesus Christ for a lot of people. You see, when I look at Daniel, remember, folks, many times in your life you will have great influence when other people see what you've went through. If your life, don't shy away from the storm, folks, because it's the very storm that might give you influence in somebody else's life. That's what I see in the book of Daniel. Knowing and having a faith so secure that says, I'm going to stand. I'm going to stand, kind of come hell or high water, I'm going to stand. I want to just close today with a word of prayer, but I want to just share that next week we have I know we have at least one baptism. I'm not sure what service that's going to be, but we just had a 101 class, and it went great. We just had a wonderful class. And I want to make sure people are aware of that, and the opportunity is going to be there next week. And so would you stand as we just close with a word of prayer? Heavenly Father, I thank you for this book of Daniel. And as we go through this book in our small group, Lord, I pray that you will open our eyes, especially as we get to the latter part of the book. A lot of prophecy. It's hard. But Lord, I pray that you will challenge us, that you'll push each and every one of us, that you will challenge us to live a little bit more on the edge. Risk a little bit because of our faith. Father, thank you for loving even us. Thank you for using this 2,600-year-old story of Daniel. Thank you for giving it to us today. Father, we love you and we desire to be your obedient children. Thank you for Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Amen. Thanks for worshiping. Remember, we have cookies and coffee, and we want your picture taken. Wonderful. May God bless.